In our last video, we talked about generating complex wave shapes, complex waveforms, which are harmonically really rich. There's lots going on there, there's lots of overtones, and it's not just any one kind of specific signal. So what I've got here is I've made a kind of mad patch that generates a whole bunch of notes just to simulate me playing on a keyboard, because we looked at that as well. We looked at MIDI control and how we get from up here a MIDI note coming in, keyboard being played in, being converted via the M2F object into frequency in hertz. Okay, so what I've got here is I've just got a little patch that generates random notes effectively, and then it sends it to my little oscillator. Okay, so a couple things. At the moment, you'll notice that this is a duophonic kind of thing. So there's two voices going on here next to each other. So just for the sort of sake of clarity, I'm going to just delete this left channel. I've got notes coming in. I'm converting MIDI data, MIDI notes, into frequency in hertz, and then I'm sending it to a bunch of different oscillators. Now those oscillators are being combined, and hopefully you've had a chance to play around with a few different things, whether that's just generating a whole bunch of different types of simple waveforms, sine, triangle, sawtooth, pulse, noise, anything, and then sort of mixing them, blending them by changing their level and attenuating them. So just to clarify here, what I'm doing is I'm attenuating the signal, I'm bringing it down so that it doesn't overload and sort of sound too loud. So I'm kind of multiplying the signal by 0.4 in this case, and what that's going to do is that's just going to go from, instead of the signal going from 0 to 1, the 0 is now going to go from 0 to 0.4. So you might attenuate your different sine waves in different ways. So maybe you've got 100% sine wave, 50% sawtooth, 35% pulse, and something, and you've kind of created these things. So we also touched a little bit on changing the frequency coming in. So for instance, here I could shift the octave down by dividing by 2 period. I could switch this in here, and you hear I've dropped an octave, because what my frequency coming in is now an octave lower. It's divided by 2. Okay, so what I've decided to do is I've done something a little bit strange. I've kind of built a kind of hacky wave shaper. So if I'm just open up this, just so you can see, you'll see that what I'm doing here is I'm doing a few of those things. I'm bringing in triangle waves. I'm going down an octave, so multiplied by 0.5 is the same as divided by 2. I've got 0.25 attenuated signal, not attenuated. I've lowered the octave by 3 octaves for the sawtooth. And then what I've done here is I've kind of done this hacky wave shaping, where I'm multiplying signals against each other to kind of shape the sound into different ways. So you see that I'm multiplying the sine wave by the sawtooth an octave lower, and doing something. And so in my scope here, you see that I've got some kind of bizarre waveforms happening. Now, regardless of how you've chosen to generate your kind of complex waveform, remember that what we're talking about broadly in this synthesizer architecture is subtractive synthesis. Okay, so this idea of sculpting a really rich harmonic source into something more nuanced, something that we want. So at the moment, this sound that we've got is kind of brash. It's really bright and sharp in a lot of respects. So what we want to do is soften it slightly. So that's what we're going to look at today. And if you think back to our synthesizer architecture, we have our sound source, and then we have our modifier, which is typically a filter. So today we're going to look at filtering in Max. Okay, so we'll come back to my strange kind of generative music instrument that I made earlier. We'll come back to that later, but for now we just want to start simple when we think about filters. So what I've got here is just a regular triangle wave oscillator playing at 220 Hertz, okay? Sounds like this. Now, we know that a triangle wave contains only the fundamental frequency and then all of the odd-numbered harmonics above it, and they fall off, they decrease over time in odd integer ratios. Okay, so we get the fundamental and then all of the odd number harmonics kind of decreasing. So let's just stop that. Let's get a quick look at that. I'm going to use Max's spectroscope. And this allows us to just very quickly see. So there we go, we've got a clear, I think this is in linear mode. I can open the inspector here and change the scale if I want to. So at the moment I'm displaying frequency in a linear scale, and I can switch that over to a logarithmic scale, and that will show like that. Let's keep it like this for the time being. You'll also see, actually, while this is playing, I'm just going to turn the volume down. That there is another kind of mode of the spectroscope, which will be familiar to some of you, I assume, which is a sonogram view. So if I open another copy here, I can change the display mode from spectrogram to sonogram, and there's a few different modes here. But what it's essentially doing is showing us an image of frequency amplitude. Okay, so the default setting here, the grayscale one, I can switch it out to color, and we can have it forward scrolling. So here we see the higher the amplitude of a particular frequency band, the kind of brighter the color. So this purple that we see the majority of means that it's quieter than this green section, it's quieter than that orange section. Okay, so we've got two different ways of viewing our sound as we change this. So I'm going to lose the sonogram for the time being, but let's keep this spectrogram here. So Max gives us a few different options for filtering, but there are three kind of basic what they call black box filters, which means we sort of plug in something and we can control it with a few controls. So we're gonna look at those today. They are the Onepole filter, which is a simple low pass filter. Then there's the low res object, which is a low pass filter with a resonant peak, and that has a slightly sharper transition, so we can kind of get some nice effects with that. And then finally there's the reson object, which is a simple bandpass filter. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at those in use, have a listen to them, and see how they sound just with our simple oscillator for the time being, and then we'll listen to it in the context of a more complex oscillator. So let's bring this sound back up just so we can hear it as I change this. So let's start with the Onepole filter. So I start to type it in, and we see that we get some options here for arguments. So we've got a center frequency, and we can express that. So let's start. If we've got a fundamental frequency of 220 Hertz, let's put in 220 Hertz and see what happens when we plug it in. So I'm just going to disconnect this quickly, plug that in there. You see how our spectrogram has changed quite dramatically. In fact, actually, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to keep one spectrogram over here on this side. In fact, actually, let's just move everything over a little bit just so we've got a bit more space. I'm going to keep another copy of the spectrogram here, and this one on the left hand side is just going to keep our original triangle wave. So you can see the difference that this Onepole has made now. Okay, let me just turn this up a bit and we can have a listen to it. Okay, now as a static filter, it's not immediately obvious what it's doing, and since we only have one oscillator going into it, it's always going to be a little subtle, so we have to listen closely. But one nice thing that we can do is we can change the cutoff frequency with an argument. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to create a new float number, so I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut F for that, and plug that in here. And now what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to change the cutoff frequency. Now, on a low pass filter, essentially the way that it works, we have a pole. Now, if you imagine around that pole, I have filters coming in, and beyond this point, they cut off. So around this point, filters come in and then they are attenuated. Okay. Now I can change that cutoff frequency higher or lower according to a frequency. That will affect the kind of bandwidth of frequencies that are reduced here. So if I just scroll up, you should hear it change. And we can see on our spectrogram, as I increase the cutoff frequency, it's allowing more and more of those high frequencies through. And if I bring it back down, it's going to cut them out slowly. Okay. Now this is not a particularly good user interface for this, so what I'm going to quickly do is I'm just going to make ourselves a little fader so we can quite quickly sweep through a whole range of frequencies rather than having to scroll through it with the mouse wheel. So I'm going to create a slider object, and we know that our slider outputs a certain range of frequencies. I'm going to look in the inspector window here on the right hand side, so that's Command I if you didn't already have it up, and the range, I'm going to take that from 128. I'm going to take that up to let's say 5,000 hertz. Okay, so now I can sweep through from 0 to 5,000 hertz really quickly, and that'll just make things a little easier going forwards. So the Onepole is just a simple low-pass filter, and if you want to know more about it, you can just hold Alt and click on the object, and it will open up a really helpful, really insightful help file here. So we see the Onepole object implements the simplest of IIR filters, providing a 6 decibel per octave attenuation. So that's the knockoff curve that I was talking about. So we've got a few other simple filter objects in Max that we're going to have a look at. Now again, if you're ever stuck for finding an object, one of the really quick ways is opening a help file like this, and either looking on the C also, so you see here it gives us a list of potential filter objects, or on this question mark here, other filters that we might want to look at. So the next one that I'm going to change this out. I'm going to change this to a, I'm going to turn this off first. I'm going to turn this to the low res object. And now what that's going to give us is a resonant low pass filter. So essentially we have our same cutoff frequency, we have our same pole, and then there's a peak around this. So it's going to give us a little bit of makeup gain. So essentially what you're going to get is, I hope I'm drawing this the right way around, you're going to have unfiltered frequencies coming in, and then they're going to peak up and then slope back down. So we should see this in our spectrogram, provided I just need to set incoming. You'll see, sorry, you see we've got some options here. We have our cutoff frequency, which I'm going to set again to 220, and then we have a resonance. I'm going to start with a low resonance here. I'm going to say 0.2, okay, because we don't want to put too much gain going in, otherwise we can kind of get a squeaky sound. So let's have a quick listen to this. Now as I filter up, can you see around here there's a slight peak? Okay, just keep a close eye on the filter. Okay, I'm going to make this a little more pronounced now. In fact, actually I will give us another floating point number, and we can just dial that in. As I increase the gain, the Q or the resonance, you see how this peak becomes really pronounced. Okay, now actually I'm going to change the range of this slider to even higher now. So let's go from 0 to 9,000 hertz. There we go. Okay, now we can really hear something here. So what's happening is we are right here, we are filtering frequencies below above 638 hertz. Okay, but we're also kind of putting in a resonant boost here with the resonance curve. Oh dear, went a bit too high there. Sorry if that was in your headphones. Now remember, our fundamental frequency for this oscillator is 220 Hertz, okay? We have the odd numbered harmonics above that coming in, but what we're doing here is filtering those out and giving them a little bit of a push. So if you think back to this idea of subtractive synthesis, how we're sculpting the sound, you can see how we can start to get quite specific in the way that we kind of manipulate and sculpt our sound. Okay, so let's turn this off a second. I want to keep this here, so I'm just gonna drag this, a copy of this over. So we have one more, which is a slightly different filter. So far we've had the Onepole, which is a very simple low-pass filter. It lets low frequencies past. And the low res, which was a resonant low-pass filter. Now this last one, reson, is different. This is a simple bandpass filter. So okay, if you imagine, again, I'm sorry if I'm doing this the wrong way around, this is a low-pass filter, okay? So all of these frequencies are allowed in, and then anything over here is filtered out. A bandpass filter only lets specific frequencies within a band through. So it lets everything in here, and everything outside is cut out, okay? So reson. And again, let's just find out what arguments that it wants. So it wants an initial gain, it wants a center frequency, and it wants a Q. Now, I'm not completely sure what that initial gain wants to be, so I'm going to check the help file. This is a really good habit. I've been using Macs for years, but I still use the help file all the time. So, there we go. I'm going to set it to 1, I'm going to set a frequency, and I'm going to set a Q. So let's just set this to 1, 220, and 0.2 to start, and I can hook up this, my cutoff frequency here to this center frequency, and I can just have this little Q control there. Let's see what we get. Okay, so I have quite a low Q here. Okay, so can you see that as I raise the Q frequency, my fundamental and then the first few, so that's the third, the fifth, the seventh, and so on, they're attenuating. But the frequencies around 5,000 Hertz, around this center frequency, are staying. There we go. So we get this idea that a band. Now this is, remember that this is attenuating frequencies. This is not completely cutting them out. Okay, so that fundamental frequency, which is way away from 5,805 Hertz, is still there, but it's much quieter than it was. Okay. This Q can come right up here. It's a bit risky. If I go down too low, that will peak. But see, as my Q gets higher, what I'm doing is effectively I'm bringing the sharpness of this bandwidth in until eventually, if I take this Q right up, you'll see that I am now just focusing in on a single harmonic in that triangle wave. Can you see that happening in the spectrogram down here? You can almost tune it in. There we go. So this is specific bands. So we had the low pass frequencies letting low frequencies pass, and we have the band pass, which is letting all frequencies within a band pass. Now they're the simplest ways of using a filter in Macs, and they're very direct. Now we can simulate other kinds of filters that you might have come across. For instance, a high pass filter by subtracting a low pass filter from the frequency itself. Let's just give that a go quickly. Hold on, just to show you. So I've got my low res filter here. I've got my original signal, so I'm going to create a new object, minus signal, because I'm going to be subtracting a signal. So my original signal is going to go to the right inlet here, which is called the left inlet. And then my subtracted signal is coming in here. So what I'm doing is I have my original signal, and then I am subtracting the low pass signal to get a high pass signal. So let me just, there we go. Now if this was a low pass signal, what we would hear is the low frequencies stay and we filter out the higher frequencies. But because we've kind of flipped it back on itself, now we're keeping the higher frequencies and we're getting rid of the lower frequencies. Now, if that all seems a little bit complicated and a little bit convoluted, it kind of is. So don't worry if you don't get your head around it first. In fact, actually, Max has a few other little tricks that make filtering a bit easier. One of them is the state variable filter, SVF tilde. And what that's going to do is you're going to plug in a signal, and then on the outlets, if we look here, this is going to act as a bunch of different filters. Okay. Ooh. So if I zoom in here, just so you can see this, we've got a low pass outlet, a high pass outlet, and a band pass outlet, and then a notch output. Okay, so actually this filter is simultaneously acting as 4 other filters. So we have cutoff frequency control and we have resonance control, like this filter here. So what we could do is we could plug into this filter. Let's get rid of this strange flip thing, and let's plug in our center frequency, and let's plug in our resonance. And let's just say, let's start here. Let's start at 0.5. Actually, this is a good point, since if you noticed, it says resonance 0 to 1, which is generally good advice not to go outside that range, otherwise terrible things tend to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to limit this number so I can't accidentally scroll outside it. So I'm going to open the inspector, and then down in the bottom corner it allows me to set the minimum. So I'm going to set that to 0, and the maximum, which I'm going to set to 1. So now, no matter how hard I try, I can't make a mistake by scrolling out too far. So I'm going to just set this somewhere here. And now, if I turn this on, as I connect up, you'll hear different filters. So there's our low pass filter. There's our high pass filter. So it's just one object, and it's giving us 2 different outlets now. 4 different outlets. So that's kind of handy. That's a nice way of using a bunch of different filters, so you might want to try that. Alternatively, there is a very powerful filter. Now, I would say if you do want to use this, just be a little tricky, because be a little careful, sorry, because the way that it's working is it's kind of cascading multiple pole filters. Okay, so it gives us a whole bunch of inputs, but the nice thing is if I open the help file, you will see that this has a really nice user interface. So I'm just going to look at this one right now, but it lets us draw in like graphical EQs as we might want them. So it gives us a whole range of different types. So we could look at that bandpass now and see that in action and draw that in. Okay, so if you wanted to explore that, that's something worth checking out. It's a 2-pole 2-0 filter. And if you really want to get into the kind of technicalities behind filters and filter coefficients, check out the reference, but also check out the Max really helpful guide on audio filtering. There's a lot more information there, but it tends to get a little deeper, a little quicker. Okay, so for the time being, I think it would be fun to play around with filtering some slightly more complex audio signals, complex oscillators and waveform setups. So let's just give that a go. Okay, so here's my kind of wiggly, automatic, weird, complex oscillator music thing. from the start of the video, and you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm generating random notes within a minor pentatonic scale, so MIDI notes, converting those to frequency, sending it to my complex waveform oscillator, and then outputting it. Now let's try and hook up a filter. Let's try and hook up a low pass resonant filter. I'm starting to lose my words here. So I need to give it a cutoff. So I'm going to say 200, and I'm going to say 0.9. So I'm going to make it a little bit resonant, a little bit peaky. Now I'm going to hook this up here. And see immediately how it's kind of filtered out all of those higher frequencies, you know, those rich tones that we had before that were frankly a little bit harsh, but now we've really lost a lot of them. Now, we can hook up a filter here, a cutoff frequency here. I'm going to drag this out. And remember what we did before, we had another floating number that in the inspector I set so that it couldn't go outside the kind of recommended range of 0 to 1. So I can, oh dear, that's still a little bit high. In fact, actually, I'm going to get rid of the chances of me doing that again by setting the limit of this number. Oh god, I'm really losing it now. To 0.9. There we go. So I can only go up to 0.9 now, but I can drag this. That's really nice as you kind of drag around, because it's such a rich kind of harmonic sound. As I filter it with that high resonant, like, you know, Q cutoff, we get those sounds almost like vowels, you know, like a vowel synth. It's very kind of Daft Punk coming through now. So you can really see the power and the kind of the role of sculpting your sound with audio filters, right? But you might remember at the start I called this a duophonic instrument, okay? It had two voices running simultaneously, okay? So this was kind of supposed to imitate left and right hand playing a keyboard, and I had them both hooked up to oscillators so that it sounded kind of like I had, you know, two melodies running simultaneously. But what if instead of, you know, this being two hands on a keyboard, this was one hand on a keyboard playing the melody that you're hearing now, and then the other hand was playing maybe a keyboard just of a filter? It's not an instrument that you or I can necessarily know, but it's something that we can create in Max, and it might sound cool. So let's give that a go, okay? So what I have here is I have my MIDI note numbers, which are this little object here is I've written a little program to output random numbers in a minor pentatonic scale. So I'm going to connect this here, and you see that these are two different numbers coming out. Okay, so this is two hands playing a keyboard, right? And they're both being converted from MIDI numbers into frequency. So it could hook this up. It's kind of nice. So we've got the filter frequency shifting. So it's still, the cutoff frequencies are frequencies from a minor pentatonic scale. And they're moving differently. They're moving kind of across and phasing across the main melody, the oscillator, which is being tuned to this minor pentatonic scale. That's kind of cool. We could also do the same thing that we did with some of our oscillators, some of our waveforms. We could... Oh, that works. So that now the filter is a lower filter, it's about an octave lower. And we know because this is a low pass filter, that's cutting out more of the higher frequencies. We get some cool sounds in there. But one of the things about this is that it's all very immediate, and we don't get to hear one of the coolest sounds with filters, which is that kind of sweep, that wah, the envelope. And this is going to be something that we focus on a lot more in the next video, but we can kind of just touch on it now because it's kind of cool and it would be a shame to miss it. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to go back to it just being tuned to our oscillator. And we're going to generate a new object. And this is the line object, okay? Now, line object, just to pull up the help file, you will see, generates a timed ramp. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, if you imagine that at the moment, I'm just outputting random numbers, okay? So I'm moving from one random number straight to another random number, and then straight to another random number, and then straight to another random number, okay? So we're doing this, right? Now, by generating a ramped time, it's going to allow us to smoothly transition from one random number to another. So if I just hook this up here, you'll see that it's not doing anything smoothly, really. It's not doing anything different to this number. So that's because we need to send it a time. Okay, so this second inlet, total ramp time in milliseconds. So I'm going to send that a message, and I'm going to say 100 milliseconds. I'm going to connect it to this number. So anytime the frequency of our filter changes, we're going to generate a ramp over 100 milliseconds. So now we have this kind of sweeping filter. Let's put it back in an octave lower. Does it work better if it's a little faster or a little slower? Okay, and in true Max style, because hooking things up and making things a little wilder and a little more complicated, I could drag this all across and then flip it across. So now the right hand is controlling the oscillator and the left hand is controlling a filter. Let's bring that up to 0.9 and let's make it stereo. There we go. We have this kind of warping, strange auto-wah filter now going on as the low-pass filters just sweep in and out of these different frequencies that are tuned to kind of something musical. So we have this strange instrument now that's kind of an oscillator, but the filters are shifting. And we have this really, really lovely sound. So we've moved away from this kind of brash, you know, nasally, lots and lots of triangle and sawtooth waves. And now we've got something a little bit more fluid. We've got something kind of fun. So, this video's covered a lot of stuff. I hope that you will have spent some time playing around with a lot of this stuff. You know, like, don't necessarily just make something the way I've made it. This is just something that I've come up with while I've been making this video today. This is not the only thing that Max can do. Play around, make mistakes, try things out, make weird, phasey, auto-wah filter things, and see what else they can do. Play around, have some fun, and I hope you make something cool.